She came home from a 10-day Caribbean cruise and walked up to a concrete slab. The house was gone. Not burned, not condemned, not repossessed, just gone. Every board, every window, every inch of the home my family and I built from raw lumber, lifted off its foundation, loaded onto flatbeds, and driven across state lines while she was somewhere in the Bahamas getting a tan with the man she'd been sleeping with behind my back. The bare concrete sat there under the Tennessee sky, the exposed pipes stuck up out of the dirt like a monument to her own decisions. And every bit of it was completely legal. My name is Wade Callum. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in a small town in East Tennessee called Harlow Creek. Population maybe 8,000, if you count the outlying farms. The kind of place where people wave from their porches, where everybody already knows your daddy by name before you introduce yourself, and where the same faces show up at your high school graduation and your grandfather's funeral and everything in between. After high school, I joined the Coast Guard. 4 years search and rescue out of a station on Lake Michigan. Cold work. The kind of cold that gets past your gear and settles into your joints and stays there. We pulled people out of water that would kill you in under 15 minutes, sometimes in the dark, sometimes in conditions where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That kind of work either breaks you or makes you into something quieter and steadier than you were before. I came home steadier. I also came home to my drum kit. I'd been playing since I was 12. A battered 4-piece set my Uncle Frank bought at a garage sale and dropped in my parents' garage with exactly 0 instruction. I taught myself from YouTube videos and bad recordings of classic rock songs played too loud at a volume that made my mother come to the garage door with a specific expression on her face. By the time I got back from the Guard, I was good enough to play with a 3-piece band called Rough Weather. We weren't famous. We played the Rusty Rail on Friday nights, a few summer festivals down in Knoxville, and one memorable New Year's Eve gig where the PA system blew halfway through and we finished the set with the drummer and bass player going completely acoustic while 40 people in paper hats either cheered or didn't care. Those Friday nights were mine. The crowd noise, the thump of the kick drum moving up through the floor and into my feet, the easy weight of a cold beer after the last set. That was my life, and I was good with it. Then I met Serena. She showed up at a show one Saturday in October. Dark hair, bright laugh, the kind of woman who fills up a room without appearing to try. We dated 8 months before I proposed. I was completely in it. Head down, no peripheral vision, the whole thing. What I didn't see clearly enough, and I'll own this, was that Serena loved the idea of a wedding in a way that had nothing to do with loving me. The venue tours, the dress fittings, the engagement photos she posted every other day. She had a Pinterest board with over 400 pins. She told me that number like it was an achievement. What she did not love, I would eventually learn, was the quieter, slower business of being married to a regular guy who worked a day job in HVAC's maintenance and played drums on weekends in a bar that smelled like beer and pine cleaner. I was a straight shooter. She wanted a different target. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that I had land, I had family, and I wanted to build us something real. My dad Pete owned a 2-acre plot on Sawmill Road. Flat land, good soil, backed up against a stand of white oaks that went full amber every October like something out of a painting. Pete, my Uncle Frank, and my 2 older cousins had been in residential construction their whole lives. When I told them I wanted to build on that land, they didn't sit around and talk about it. They showed up the following Saturday with tools in their trucks and coffee in their hands. I want you to understand what that build actually was. This was not a weekend project. This was 8 months of early mornings and late evenings. Saturdays that started before sunrise and ended after dark. My Uncle Frank drew up the plans himself, at his kitchen table, over 3 weeks, refusing to use a template because he said the land deserved better. My dad poured the footings. My cousin Ray, who ran a Finnish carpentry shop out of Maryville, did the interior trim entirely by hand. Every door frame, every built-in shelf, every piece of crown molding, He cut and fitted himself, piece by piece, the way people used to do things before everything got fast and cheap. I ran electrical wire. I hung drywall until my arms gave out and then hung more. I sweated copper pipe in the utility room until my knuckles bled, and I had to wrap them in shop rags to keep going. The whole build smelled like sawdust and fresh concrete, and the particular kind of sweat that comes from doing something that actually matters. My family poured their own money and sweat into the framing. Frank alone put in close to $60,000 of materials and labor financed through his construction company. His attorney told him to file a mechanics lien on the structure, standard practice to protect his investment, until everything was properly settled between family. We filed it, initialed the paperwork, and moved on without thinking much about it. At the time, it seemed like a formality. We moved in that November. The floors still smelled like fresh-cut oak. The fireplace in the living room worked on the first try. My dad stood in the kitchen doorway that evening with a cup of coffee, looking around the room slowly, and the expression on his face was the quietest kind of pride I've ever seen on a person. The first year of the marriage was fine. Not great, fine. Serena complained about the drive into town. She complained about the neighbor's rooster. She redecorated the living room twice and said the kitchen layout was not quite right. Both times she visited the build site, neither time picking up a tool. She had friends in Knoxville, who she saw more and more. Her schedule got harder to track. The second year, the house went quiet in a way that didn't feel like peace. It felt like absence. I started noticing things. She came home late on Thursdays with explanations that shifted slightly between the telling and the retelling. She got a second phone she said was for work. She stopped asking about my schedule, stopped asking when I'd be back from a job site or how a gig went. That last part stuck with me the hardest. When a person who used to track your every move stops caring where you are, something in the arrangement has changed. And not in your favor. I found out the way you usually find out. Not from a confrontation, not from a dramatic moment. A buddy of mine ran into them at a restaurant in Knoxville. Not a dark corner of a place you'd go to hide, but a regular table near the window like they'd long since stopped worrying about being seen. He texted me that night and asked if I wanted to talk. I didn't answer until the next morning. His name was Cord Waverly, commercial real estate. I'd heard the name once in passing and hadn't remembered it. Now I did. I confronted Serena the morning after I found out. That was where I made my mistake. Not in knowing, in how I handled the knowing. I was direct, I was emotional, I had no lawyer on the phone, no documentation, nothing prepared. I just stood in my own kitchen and told my wife what I knew. Thinking in that moment, like a straight shooter, like someone who believes that honesty is the fastest path to resolution. She didn't cry, she didn't explain. She walked out of the kitchen, made a phone call, and 48 hours later I was holding a court-issued emergency protective order with my name on it. False claims. Every line of it. But it had a judge's signature, it had a date, and it told me to vacate the property immediately. I stood on the front porch of my own handmade house and read a document telling me to leave it. I drove to my dad's place and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Didn't say much. He poured me a coffee I didn't drink. The clock on his kitchen wall ticked. That's the part they don't warn you about, when they tell you to always do the right thing. Nobody tells you that being calm and honest in a confrontation can be written down, reframed, and turned into a legal filing against you. I had no recording. No documentation trail. Just my word against hers, and the court had already made its preliminary decision. Within a week, Cord Waverly's truck was in my driveway. I want you to sit with that image for a moment, the man she'd been cheating with. Parking in my driveway, in front of the house my dad poured the footings for. In front of the white oak trees my uncle used to measure the property line. I slept in my truck the first 3 nights. Then my cousin set me up in his spare room. I had a duffel bag, a drum kit in cases stacked in the corner, and the business card of an attorney my father knew named Warren Holt. Warren was in his early 60s. Ex-military, the kind of man who took notes in ink, Not because he had to, but because he didn't trust things he couldn't put his hand on. He reviewed the full property situation over about 2 weeks and then called me one evening. I could hear something specific in his voice. A particular kind of stillness that lawyers get when they've found the thing they were looking for. "Wade," he said, "walk me through how your uncle handled the construction financing." I told him. Frank's company. Materials, labor, all of it financed through the business. The lien filed at the start. The intra-family transfer at closing. Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he said that lien was never severed. It was never formally released at closing, likely because the transaction was handled informally between family and someone skipped the step. I didn't follow all of it. I asked him to say it plainly. "The bank holds the land deed," Warren said. "Your family owns the building." I set the phone face down on the passenger seat of my truck and sat in the parking lot of a gas station in Harlow Creek, staring at the middle distance. The building, the walls, the roof, the oak floors my cousin sanded on his knees. The fireplace my dad lit for the first time with crumpled newspaper and a long kitchen match, both of us watching it catch. The cabinet trim. The front porch with the 2 steps that creaked on the left side. The bedroom I wired myself. All of it. Hours. Warren spent 2 more weeks confirming it from every legal angle. A property specialist. A second opinion from a construction law attorney in Nashville. All of them said the same thing. The mechanic's lien had never been legally extinguished. Serena's name was on the land mortgage. But the physical structure, every board, every window, every nail, was still tied to Frank's lien. She did not own the building she was living in. I asked Warren what our options were. He looked at me across his desk. "Under Tennessee law," he said, "if you own a structure and can physically separate it from the land without permanent damage to the land itself, with the right equipment and permits, you can relocate it." I stared at him. "You can move it," he said simply. It took 6 weeks to set up. Permits. Engineering assessment. A structural moving company out of Chattanooga called Ridgeline Heavy Haul, a crew that had relocated 4 other buildings in the past decade, and came recommended by 2 different engineers Warren contacted. While all of that moved forward, I kept playing my role, showed up to work, answered Warren's calls, slept in my cousin's spare room and stared at the ceiling. There were nights during those 6 weeks when I asked myself whether this was the right thing. Not legally, Warren had been thorough, but personally. I'm not a vindictive person. I believe in proportionate consequences, not in scorched earth, and I sat with that question more than once. Then I'd remember the porch, the court order, Cord Waverly's truck in my driveway. I kept going. And then Serena announced a trip, 10 days in the Caribbean. She and Cord, boarding pass photo and everything, posted on a social account I still had access to because she hadn't thought to remove me. Sunset cocktails. Deck views. 100 heart emojis from people who had no idea. Warren called it a fortunate alignment. I called it a closing window, and I wasn't going to miss it. Ridgeline arrived on day 2 of the cruise. 6 men. 2 hydraulic flatbed trailers, a crane unit, and a set of heavy-duty jacks that looked like they belonged in a mining operation. My dad was there. Frank. Both my cousins. 3 guys from the band who I hadn't even called. They just found out through the family and showed up in work boots with coffees, which is the kind of people they are, and I will not forget it. I stood at the edge of the property and watched. The crew disconnected utilities first. Careful, methodical, no wasted motion. Then they went into the crawl space with equipment and began the process of unbolting the timber sill plates from the foundation anchors. Each bolt that came loose rang out across the property like a slow, deliberate note. The sound traveled. Birds left the oak trees at the back of the yard. Then the jacks went in. Slowly, inches at a time, they lifted the structure, the whole thing. 4 bedrooms. 2 bathrooms. The kitchen, the living room with the fireplace. The front porch with the 2 creaking steps. all of it rising off the concrete slab it had sat on for 2 years. The groan of the wood under that movement was something I felt in my chest more than heard. A deep, low exhale, like the house knew what was happening and was okay with it. My dad stood beside me and didn't say anything. Neither did I. Once it cleared the foundation, the flatbeds rolled under in sequence. Main structure on one trailer, attached garage on the second. Secured, measured, braced. The crew chief walked the perimeter twice before he was satisfied. By the time they rolled out onto Sawmill Road, the sun was going down over the tree line. 8 hours of work. My Uncle Frank walked out onto the bare concrete slab, looked down at the exposed pipes rising from the ground, and said quietly, "Good, that's what she bought." We drove it to a piece of land my dad owned in the next county, Sevier County, 40 minutes away. I followed the convoy in my truck, 2 flatbeds and a crane unit, moving a house through the Tennessee countryside just after sunset. We passed through 2 towns. People on the sidewalk stopped. A man at a stoplight pulled alongside me, looked at the load ahead of us, looked at me, and shook his head slowly. I gave him a small wave. Serena came home on a Tuesday. I know, because Frank called me. He'd driven past on a pretext. "She's there," he said. I didn't go. I had no need to watch her standing on an empty slab. That moment was hers alone to experience. I sat in my cousin's driveway and listened to his kids playing in the backyard and a dog barking down the road. Ordinary Tuesday sounds. The same world, still turning. Warren told me later, through the legal proceedings that followed, that she had called in a complete panic, walked up the path expecting to unlock a front door, found the concrete slab instead, the exposed pipes, a plastic dumpster at the edge of the property, holding her personal belongings, her clothes, the pieces of furniture that were hers before the marriage, everything accounted for, everything handled exactly as Warren had specified. Nothing damaged, nothing missing, nothing that could be converted into another filing. Just gone, completely legal. Her attorney reviewed Warren's documentation and told her she had a serious problem. The mechanic's lien was clean. The structure had been legally removed by its rightful owners. The land under the mortgage was land, flat, bare, concrete-slabbed land in Harlow Creek, Tennessee, with utility pipes rising out of the ground, and the ghost of a house that no longer belonged to anyone but the people who built it. The legal process ran its course over the following months. I won't pretend it was fast or easy. There were hearings and filings and stretches where patience was the hardest thing I'd ever practiced. But I held on to something in those months. My family had put themselves into that house, not just money, though it was real money. Frank drawing plans at his kitchen table after midnight. My dad checking footings on a Sunday morning, because he wanted to be sure. My cousin Ray spending a whole weekend fitting baseboard trim in a bedroom he'd never sleep in, doing it right anyway, because that's who he is. You don't hand that over to a piece of paper. You don't let that become someone else's life just because they filed first. Serena reached a settlement. She signed over the land in exchange for a buyout of her equity in the mortgage, significantly less than she'd imagined when she filed that protective order and watched me drive away. Warren had positioned the case too well. She moved to Asheville. I didn't follow up. The day the title cleared, Ridgeline Heavy Haul backed 2 flatbeds down Sawmill Road one more time. They set the house back down on the slab the same way they'd lifted it. Slow, precise, final. The crew chief walked me through the reconnection, utilities, sill plates, foundation anchors. His guys worked the same way they always did. No fanfare, no speeches, just work done right. When the last anchor bolt was seated, the crew chief handed me the clipboard. I signed the work order and handed it back. He looked at the house, then at me. "In 20 years doing this," he said, "I've moved a lot of structures. This is the only one I've moved twice." I looked at the porch, the oak trees out back. The 2 steps on the left side that I already knew would still creak. "First time was to prove a point," I said. "Second time was to come home." He nodded once, walked back to his truck. I stood on the concrete for a moment before going inside. The house smelled like road dust and wood, and somewhere underneath it, faint as a memory, the cut oak smell from the day we first moved in. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water from the tap, stood there drinking it in the quiet. My dad knocked on the open front door a few minutes later and stepped inside. He looked at the kitchen, the trim, the walls his hands had helped frame. Then he looked at me. "Welcome home, son," he said. That was enough. There are moments when doing the right thing feels like the slowest, loneliest option available to you. When the person who lied gets to stay comfortable while you sleep in a spare room and keep your mouth shut and let the process work. But that patience has weight. When you build something with your own hands, really build it, board by board, bolt by bolt, with people who showed up because they love you. It doesn't stop being yours because someone filed a piece of paper. She came home to bare concrete and exposed pipes. I came home to the fireplace my dad lit on a cold November evening. Some things you just can't take from a person, especially the things they built themselves. If this story hits something real, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you've got a story of your own, drop it in the comments. I read every single one.